districts, and then previously participating districts have added a good number of sites to their operation for 24-25 as well. So you saw in the agenda for this meeting that I outlined some of the basic things that we'll cover, but I've also left lots of time for questions and answers at the end. And we've got a good mix of both experienced CEP operators as well as some newer ones. So you new folks have got some good and experienced partners in this who have identified some best practices in their time operating CEP. So I'm glad to have their experience and their voices here. I want you to know that you can ask questions at any time. Feel free to unmute your microphone, raise your hand in Zoom, type your question in the chat. This is pretty informal, and I like a conversational style where we're able to learn from each other. We'll cover the basic considerations and information for CEP to get started. And I just wanted to remind you that this session is recorded, and I'll send it out to all of the CEP schools contacts. So you can refer to this later, even if you are here today, but it will also be available to folks at CEP schools who were unable to join today. I will record questions and answers as well, and we'll consolidate those and send those out with the recording too. So we'll do that overview of CEP. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of different ways you'll answer questions in the application that's in the CNP system. We'll cover the basics of meal counting and claiming, as well as take a look at how to submit a monthly claim for reimbursement, because if you're new to CEP, that's going to look a little bit different. We'll talk briefly about some considerations for updates to your school's charge policy as it relates to school nutrition programs for charges from the school nutrition program to student accounts. And we'll finish up by looking at the alternate income or benefit form. NDE makes a template available along with a cover letter that can help you communicate about the CEP to households of your enrolled students. We'll talk about some of the basics of what you'd want to make sure your version includes if you don't choose to use the templates that we make available. So in the school nutrition program's site application in the CNP system is probably the first place you're going to make the appropriate selections or changes based on or compared to past answers or selections in the questions of the system. And in the site application, that would be question number 9. So if you did not do CEP in school year 23-24, and you're beginning that option or that provision in school year 24-25, the last year's approved answers are going to roll over into the 24-25 application. So you're going to want to make sure you really get your eyes on number 9 of the site application. And for both breakfast and lunch, you're going to select non-pricing. And you can see I've made that selection in the example or picture on this page. You would do the same thing for after school snack if your school building that does CEP does serve after school snack. You will remove any values that rolled over from a previously approved application for paid price and reduced price meals. And then you will indicate the adult price as you see here. And reimbursement rates for school year 24-25 were published today.
I remember seeing you.
So the values you see in the adult price section here would be very close to what you would charge adults who eat meals at CEP schools. I will put out an email to all the school contacts with this information probably tomorrow morning, but you can look for the adult meal pricing information and information on how we came to the determination for the prices you see there. But you want to make sure you do report an adult meal price, of course, because adults are not served meals at no cost. Only enrolled students receive meals at no cost at CEP schools. Okay. I've got it. Sorry, my thing's going the wrong way. There we go. The sponsor application also has questions related to meal pricing. And so it's a best practice to complete all of your site applications first if you have more than one site, okay? The information that the system gathers from those individual site applications, pricing information, should be pulled into number 51 of the sponsor application. So if you have a mix of CEP buildings and non-CEP buildings, which I know exists in a couple of the schools represented here, you would see elementary paid and reduced, middle or junior high paid and reduced, and high school paid and reduced values pulled into the table I'm displaying in 51, and it should be pulled in from those buildings that operate the traditional or pricing program. But for district-wide CEP, or you have only one building and it is operating CEP, that is the selection that you should make for both lunch and breakfast. Make the appropriate selection for snack. It might be non-pricing snack if you serve after-school snack. And for, again, district-wide CEP operation where you have no buildings charging for paid or reduced price meals, those reduced and paid price fields in number 51 would remain blank, and you have only the adult prices reported. Okay, so again, if you have a mix of traditional pricing program and non-pricing CEP buildings, you are going to see reduced and paid student prices pulled in from those site applications into the sponsor application number 51. So meal counting and claiming should be done at the point of meal service, just like it has been done in a traditional meal service scenario. The difference is we don't care at all, because you're not going to report it, how many of those meals were served to students eligible for free meals, reduced price meals, or paid price meals. We care only about the number of reimbursable meals served to enrolled students. Therefore, your meal counting procedure at the point of service, during meal service time, of course, can be done using a simplified method. Maybe a clicker or a tally sheet is acceptable, where the person standing at the end of the meal service line is, first of all, looking to make sure that the tray the student has gone through the line and ends up having in their hands, that the foods on those tray comprise a reimbursable meal, and that that person is an enrolled student. That's counted as one meal, one reimbursable meal. And at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, right, you're interested in aggregating or totaling the number of reimbursable meals served to students. Again, we're not interested in, and you do not have to report the number of meals served to students who qualify for free, reduced, or paid price meals, okay? We're interested only in you reporting that total number of reimbursable meals in each claim month. I'm going to check the chat here. Julie, I'm so glad you noticed my typo. Yes, I'm going to have to go look at the reimbursement rates. I think I told someone it's 480 to 475 because I didn't check my math closely. So when I send my email about the reimbursement rates tomorrow morning, you'll know what the definite price is. Thank you. So this is what the claim looks like in the system. Okay, it looks similar, but not identical to what you have been reporting using the traditional free, reduced, and paid method, that is, right? You're going to report, only the values that have text boxes around them. So G4, number of enrolled children in that claim month, is what you would report. And then the system is going to fill in the values that you see are shaded in gray for G1, G2, and G3, okay? You're obviously going to complete the number of operating days and the average daily attendance in L1 and L2, as the same for N1 and N2 for lunch and breakfast respectively. And then for each of those meal types, you're going to report in L3 letter D for lunch, the total number of reimbursable student lunches. And then the system is going to apply the correct percentages based on your identified student percentage to determine what percent of those meals will be reimbursed at the highest rate, the free rate of reimbursement, and what percent of the meals are going to be reimbursed at the paid rate, the lowest rate of reimbursement. So again, you're reporting an aggregate number of student meals, reimbursable student meals served in the claim month, and the system is going to do the math to determine the total reimbursement value. That is, of course, based on your identified student percentage. The same is true for breakfast. I didn't include the bottom of the SNP here, and I should have made this just a bit smaller, but again, for breakfast, you're going to report the total number of breakfasts you served. We don't care about how many were served to free, reduced, and paid eligible students. We care only about the aggregate number served to all students enrolled in your school. Before I move on, does anyone have questions about meal counting or the claim submission process?
I do, Katie. For our can we still, because we use Power School Cafe for our I guess counting. Can we still use that and then use the reports that we have for our totals? I mean, it'll still categorize them as far as like free, reduced, paid, but it'll still give me a total number of kids that ate that day, and then I can just use that.
Yeah, good question. And yes, that's fine to continue using your traditional accounting method. And in some cases, that might be even a better option, especially if your school ever sells a la carte items.
Yes,
Like if you have kids who want to purchase a second entree or a second milk with their meal, using your POS system is probably going to be the best way to make sure those students who do that, that their account gets charged, because seconds or a la carte purchases aren't allowable like free items. Only the reimbursable meal is. So any extras, anything outside of the reimbursable meal would have to be paid for.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, great question. Any others? Okay. So I know all schools are required to maintain a charge policy as it relates to the way students are charged for meals or a la carte purchases through the school nutrition program. So some general rules of thumb here, and of course there is probably some nuance based on the way your charge policy is written and the kind of food service program you're operating, meaning it's district-wide CEP, or maybe you have a mixture of traditional versus CEP schools. But for those districts that have all buildings operating the community eligibility provision, you would not need language about charging students for the reimbursable meals. You need to maintain the written policy for the charges related to a la carte items. And you would also need to maintain a written policy for how your school handles overdue balances. That language is already in your policy, I'm sure. You might consider if it needs to be tweaked just a little bit, or if you want to maintain the same policy for how you would handle students with overdue accounts. I think in many cases for schools that operate CEP, because the students get the full reimbursable meal at no cost, their policy about overdue balances would probably be something like not allowing students to make a la carte purchases if they don't have money in the account to pay for them. If you operate in a district where there's a mix, some buildings are community eligibility provision operators, others are the traditional free, reduced, and paid programs. Of course, you do need to maintain or retain the language in your charge policy about how much students will be charged for meals at the non-CEP schools. You would, of course, maintain the written policy for how the school handles or allows a la carte charges, and the written policy for how overdue student meal balances are handled as well. Information like how and often and in what ways guardians or parents of those students would be notified about the overdue balances, how many times they might be notified before some type of adverse action is taken against them. And keep in mind, a new law in Nebraska beginning in school year 24-25 is that schools are not allowed to use collection agencies or charge any interest on overdue school lunch balance or school meal program balances. So if you have questions about updates to your charge policy or want some input or feedback on what changes you might make because of CEP, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to help give you guidance. And this brings us to the last thing I had on the agenda for today. So after this, I'll certainly open it up to take your questions. But as you know, community eligibility provision schools cannot require or even really make available the traditional school meals benefit application form. That's because the law or the regulations prohibit mentioning meal benefits offered or issued because of the information a household provides. So you can use what looks like the NDE's traditional alternate income or benefit form. We have removed the mention of anything related to school meals benefits, but the form still collects the same kind of information that would be necessary to make a household determination based on household size, of course, and total household income. We know lots of other benefits afforded to students in school are based on the same income guidelines that the USDA sets for free and reduced price meals each year. So this form is designed to collect the same information and would allow your school staff to compare the information contained on a completed form against the current school year's income guidelines. And then you could write your own documentation or approval letter or maintain your own records for the determinations that your staff makes on an alternate income form, and then could provide that to the household or family anytime they might need that supporting documentation. Maybe they would want to use it to get a discounted rate to take the ACT. Some schools offer discounts for school activity passes because of a student's free or reduced eligibility. Others may be able to get a discount on household internet because they qualify for free or reduced price meals. So there's a number of reasons that you might want to make this form available. And I know some of the districts in the Zoom today have developed their own form. It does not look exactly like this. It looks similar and it collects all the required information. I think another reason, a potential benefit to continuing to make this form available and communicating its availability to households is that if a school ever decides to not operate the CEP any longer and return back to the traditional free, reduced, and paid meal program, continuing to make this form something that's somewhat familiar to households might just ease the transition back to getting people to apply for meal benefits through the school. So asking them to provide this standard information just for the what if you might move away from CEP and back to the traditional program, I think is another reason to make this available. Oops. Along with this, we have, and I attached it in the email, the updated meeting invitation just a few minutes before we started at 2 o'clock, is a template like household cover letter that you can use or take it as a starting point and make some tweaks to it for your own school's use. But it essentially explains that the school is going to begin operating CEP. It says that full reimbursable meals would not be charged to student accounts, but it does say that a la carte purchases would still be charged. And I think that that can be kind of a common misunderstanding among parents and students. They don't quite get why a full reimbursable meal is available for no charge, but getting a milk to go with a cold lunch I brought from home isn't free. Well, the reimbursement that the USDA is providing to the school is meant to cover the full reimbursable meal with all the required components that have to be offered based on the grade group. So a milk is not a full reimbursable meal, right? A second entree or an entree alone typically is not a full and reimbursable meal. That's why those items have to be charged to student accounts and cannot be offered at no cost and cannot be claimed for reimbursement either. Stop sharing, check the chat. See what questions we have. Jan from Franklin said they'll be starting their second year as a CEP school. It's going well, so that's good. The problem is that now parents don't want to pay for anything like a second or extra milk. Does anyone else have that problem? Yeah, great question, Jan. Anyone else have a really good way of communicating, an effective way of communicating with households about why a second milk is not free? I think that's a common problem among all things related to school nutrition program that a parent or guardian would benefit from knowing. They don't read things that you put out. I'm guessing that that's pretty common. So I guess it's probably somewhat common in most schools that operate the program, but I guess placing it in your charge policy, putting it in your new school year communication, just reminders about requirements for your school to operate the community eligibility provision might be a good place to start. And then, quarterly reminders about some of those things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It's probably not enough help to really resolve the issue, but it might help with a few.
I just think it's part of our world now too, that people just don't want to pay for stuff. But I just didn't know if anybody else had a great idea on how they approach it.
Yeah. Susie in Niobrara said they're in their second year of doing CEP. Of course, you're making them pay for milks in seconds right away. No charging. Oh, you make them come with cash? They have to have it in hand, Susie? Or they just can't, they have to have money in their account to be able to purchase that. You wouldn't let them go negative for the purchase of a second milk. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, that might be what she's saying. So sort of addresses what you mentioned, Jan. Okay, Andrew, you've asked a question about the non-discrimination statement needing to be on an alternate income form. And the answer to that is no, it doesn't. And your follow-up in your own question answered it perfectly. The alternate income form you're using isn't specific to any program necessarily, especially not a federally funded one, right? They're not getting benefits from the child nutrition programs by completing it. Therefore, you don't have to include that non-discrimination statement that is required on the meal application you would have traditionally used prior to doing CEP. Yeah, thanks for asking that one. Carrie said in previous lunch applications, there was a self-employment form for figuring out income. Can you still send that? Yeah, you could definitely still send that supplementary, I can't think what it is, attachment, some letter, right? Yeah, it doesn't mention the meal program on it specifically, I don't think, but it does point completers of, in this case, an alternate meal application to the correct portions of their tax forms from which to pull numbers in order to adequately or appropriately or correctly report their income on the alternate income form. So that is acceptable. Good question. For those self-employed people, that form is really helpful. I'm glad your experience in Mullen has been positive just by reminding folks. And hopefully your principal will not have to spend as much time working on collecting overdue balances now that you're adopting CEP. So that's a great thing. Yeah, also in Mullen, you've asked if anyone has a good like sample letter that they have provided or made available in their normal communication methods or channels to notify households that the school will be using CEP and what that means for them as far as the meal program goes. And like I said, I attached to this meeting invitation not long before the meeting started, but that CEP household like cover letter that might serve as a starting point to helping you understand the basics of what would need to be communicated to your households. Others in the room though, who have to communicate with a large number of families or households, how have you done that? Especially if as you've just started CEP, it was a brand new thing a year or two ago. What were the effective ways you figured out for sharing information about this option for their students? Thank you, Carrie, for offering to share yours. Julie, did you use your website? What methods do you normally communicate with families just about like anything, including the meals program at Papillion? Maybe she's busy.
Can you hear me?
Now I can, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So we primarily communicate via electronic communication through emails, and then our communication department does send out a lot of mass communications as well. We do send out paper versions to families that we know do not have email access, but that's very few, like under 40 families usually that we have that don't have that. And sometimes they're already directly certified as well. So it's not a huge problem. So yeah, most of our communication, and what we did last year with it being our first year, and since it was such a big change, and we are a mixed district, so we only have 5 schools right now that are on the CEP program. So it was very complicated to explain to those 5 schools that if you had a student only in that school, you did not fill out the meal application. But if you had students in a non-CEP school, you did fill out the meal application if you were not already directly certified. So we targeted those 5 schools and those families through the communications department, which we'll do again this year, to try to just be very clear with communication. I sent a lot of communication directly to the principals and the secretaries as well via email, specifically telling them what forms families needed to fill out depending on their circumstance.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Rhonda, you're a smaller school, maybe a bit more like Mullen. How did you tell families last year that they were going to get meals at no cost for their students?
We used the information letter that was provided that you put out last year in our newsletter. Is how we did it. But then we're fortunate that our district, we don't have the problem with the seconds and the extra milks, because our district actually pays the lunch fund back for all seconds and extra milks.
Oh, so you're not charging student accounts and having anyone run in the negative or not understand why the second
Correct.
milk they get is not free too. Okay.
Correct.
Good deal.
So we're very fortunate there.
Little unique in that way. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
But it's been a great program.
Glad it's been good for the most part. Or all around for you. Okay, Katie asked, said she's confused on the household economic data survey. Then someone mentions a self-employment form. Thought you didn't need to use them or couldn't use them since you're doing CEP. Yeah, Katie, I know it's a little nuanced and I'm probably not explaining it well. You can't use the traditional meal application that you would have to make determinations for free and reduced price eligible students, since all students are getting meals at no cost, because a student's individual eligibility for no-cost meals isn't an issue if the building or the district is utilizing CEP. But that alternate form, though collects all the same information as a traditional meal benefit application does, simply doesn't mention that meal benefits are determined based on what a guardian or parent puts on the form. But the use of that self-employment income form, that attachment, that one pager, I think would be allowable and possibly helpful for a household knowing what to pull from their tax forms to report on the income component of the alternate income form if they choose to complete it. So I know Tammy said, she's from Omaha Public, she indicated that they make that form available to everyone if they want to complete it. And that can be your practice. And it's allowable if you're doing CEP to have that be part of your normal annual practice. You just can't mention the meal benefits on the form. That's really the only thing it boils down to. But that way you'd have that individual student eligibility, which can be handy, maybe for the district in some ways, but also useful in case any of those households need proof or need to provide proof that they've been determined eligible for based on the free or reduced price income guidelines, right? The same guidelines that a traditional free, reduced, and paid operation would use is the guidelines that lots of other benefit programs also use. So I hope that answered the question a little bit more or more clearly than I had before. Does anyone want to issue clarity to what I'm saying, or maybe a more practical real life explanation for what I tried to explain a little bit better?
I'm just going to clarify, so those who are new to it, that income eligible or household economic data survey, just to clarify, that is for families who traditionally, with the meal application, they have the waiver form. So this is helping to create that waiver form for those families who now their students aren't paying for meals, but they still need financial help with a waiver for band instruments.
There
or
you go. Yeah.
they need a letter stating that for internet for at home or things like that. So that's where for us, our CEP schools right now are all elementary level. So there's not a lot of waivers at that level. It would be more important at the middle school and high school level because they have a lot more fee waivers there, you know, for activities, for student fees, for whatever. So this is, it does complicate things for us because we have electronic applications. So it's very quick and easy for our parents to go on, fill out the meal application, the waivers right there, they do it all right there. So this complicates it more for us because we're having to target and make sure that the right families are filling out the meal application and that the CEP schools are not if they only have students at those schools. If that makes sense.
That is complicated. Yeah.
So it's a lot more complicated for us, actually.
4 years. Yeah. Agree with you. You're making your best effort to communicate with families that their students' eligibility to get the no-cost meals because they attend one of those CEP buildings does not rely on them completing any kind of application. I understand because of households having kids at different buildings, some of them CEP and some of them not, that there is definitely going to be the occasional mix-up or someone completed it when they didn't need to. Things like that, of course, are going to happen, but making your best effort to try to make it clear that they don't have to complete anything to get the no-cost meals, I think is the goal here. And I get that it's not always going to be perfect. And yes, you've had headaches from having to figure that out, navigate that because of your mixture. Yeah. And Andrew too, of course, yes. I think there might be other schools in here with a mixture. Grand Island has some CEP and non-CEP schools as well. I'm sure there's others in here too. Tammy at OPS also keenly pointed out that alternate benefit form can also be used and retained as your school's documentation for individual student eligibility that qualifies them for free or reduced price meals. And that also qualifies students enrolled in your school for summer EBT. So you new CEP school operators for 24-25, that information is going to be very valuable for identifying and providing to the NDE a list of students eligible to receive summer EBT benefits in summer 2025 too. So you can use that alternate income form as the determination or the way you're making determinations for summer EBT eligibility as well. And Danessa, you also asked a great question that I think is definitely worth repeating and answering out loud. Should schools still import the direct cert list into your point of sale system? And my answer on that is it depends. I mean, is your point of sale system the same as your student information system, or like any rostering system that you would use to generate, for instance, that summer EBT eligibility list? You don't have to put it in the point of sale system, but I don't know if some schools that's one and the same, SIS and POS are like really embedded or the same. If that's the case, yeah, I mean, if it makes it easier for you to generate a list of SEBT eligible kids next spring, presumably, then I would put it in there. But it's not essential for any of the meal counting or charging or anything like that. That would be based on them getting meals or making a la carte purchases during the school year. Okay, so yeah, if it's the same for you, I probably would put it in there because hopefully it makes your job of submitting data for summer EBT students a little bit easier. Are you asking if they complete the alternate benefit form? Or are you just saying if a kid's in the direct cert match list, do you need to send them the traditional benefit notice form? And the answer to that is no. You don't have to do that. Because in theory, you probably would be using some alternate form of communication with all of the households of your enrolled students to notify them that you're utilizing CEP, and the only thing they will be charged for is the a la carte price identified for any of your items that you would sell, the second milk or a single milk or entree, for example. I think for cases where you're using direct cert match information and or an alternate benefit form like completion and determination to say, yeah, this kid was eligible for free or reduced price meals, either based on direct cert match or based on what they put in an alternative income form. You could send a modified version of that benefit notice letter that might prevent or help just give families a copy of that documentation in case they would ever need to provide it themselves for something like discount home internet. But as Julie mentioned at Papillion La Vista for the upper grade students, I think it might be similar at Lincoln and Omaha Public as well. Kids get a discounted rate on things like band instruments or maybe uniforms for extracurricular activities. So those are instances when it doesn't make I don't see a benefit to you making the time or taking the time to send out those individual notices. I think it really extends only to the times when the household would need proof. And maybe you want to handle those on a case-by-case basis because you might not get very many requests for it. Plus, you would need to modify the benefit notice letter that we make available because it's intended for the traditional free, reduced, and paid operation and obviously mentions meal benefits, which your notice letter wouldn't want to do. Good question. Any other questions you want to ask each other even? I would be happy to stop talking and mute myself.
Katie, I have a question. This is Nancy from Walt Hill. I just want to go back to the point of sale. We've always given our kids a 4 or 5 number digit to put into the point of sale when they came through the line. did I misunderstand you? I could use a tally or a clicker to count. They wouldn't have to learn these numbers.
Right, right.
That would make my life so much easier.
Yeah, we want to offer some relief to some of the requirements when we can. Yeah, you can use a modified meal counting procedure. So long as you can show us, demonstrate to us that the meal count you're yielding for each meal service is correct. And
But
obviously that's something we would watch when we do an
Sure.
administrative review and a site visit. But yeah, well,
But
sorry,
I
interrupt.
don't have to prove that this certain child, I have to prove that that child ate that day. I just have to show you that I have numbers and there's meals that were served. Okay. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope it's a little bit of relief or help. I understand it would be hard to get a 5-year-old to learn their 5-digit student ID. At least it'd be difficult for a little while till they caught
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, we start after Christmas. They get to wait till Christmas. That
Oh,
gives the others time to refresh and get going. But sometimes they do better than the older ones. So
Yeah. Maybe the only time you need to have them use it is if they made any of those purchases. But if they're not doing that daily, I think, the daily repetition helps them learn their number. And if they're not doing it daily, it might be easier in that case for your staff to do
all
it. But
right.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. You're welcome. So Katie had a follow-up. Judy and Mullen, right? You, Mullen?
Yeah,
Thank you. Eventually I'll learn it. So I think your follow-up was that the alternate income form, is that what you're referring to?
either form, like, I'm still just a little confused, and if we need to email about it, we can.
We could.
Is it mainly just for like that sharing information that comes with the meal application that gets them, like, we pay mileage for, and I think we pay like FFA fees or something like that for our out of district students that have to drive in. And then, like you said, there's just benefits if they're free or reduced. So is that what those documents are for? It's not really dealing with, I mean, it is like if they're free or reduced, but it has nothing to do with the pricing.
Correct. Nothing to do with the pricing. And agree with what you've put in your question to me. It's like verification that they're eligible for a scholarship because their
Yes.
household meets the income guidelines, right? Or maybe a discount or even a free community college class because they live in a home that is less than 180% of the, or 135%, I should say, of the federally determined poverty level or
I
income
always-
for household size. Mhm.
I always have a lot of seniors and some other kids that are taking college classes that need that form, that denial acceptance form to say that they do or don't have free or reduced.
That's such a great example. Yeah. So you would need to provide that form based on what they're putting in the alternate income form, not the traditional meal application form.
And the alternate meal application form is it the same thing as the household that you have attached to the email, the household
Yep.
economic data
I-
survey? Okay, perfect.
Same thing. I'm sorry. I shouldn't call things more than one, the same thing by
I think
different
that's what confused me, but I got it now.
Yeah, I think alternate income form might be like a more general term. And at NDE, we decided to name it the HEDS form, Household Economic Data Survey. Anyway, maybe I should just name it alternate income form for CEP schools.
There
That
you
probably
go.
would make more sense. I'll do that, actually. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
But yes, that's exactly what the intended purpose for completing the form is. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks for asking.
I
Hey,
raised my hand.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question. So I've ordered clickers, but for counting purposes, say we do 120 breakfasts and they click them. Can they enter that number in our POS just for recording that was 120 meals? I mean, it won't be charging them.
Yeah, I think that's
What
fine.
other schools, what do big schools do to count that?
Right.
They're not gonna manually tally everything at the end of the month, are they?
I would hope you could put it in your POS because then it's going to spit out the total at the end of the month for
Yeah,
you.
and I know we can, I just thought, is that okay that we
Oh.
do? That? We're gonna do
Mhm.
that daily so we can have that record of how many meals we serve.
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine. Go ahead. Julie's unmuting herself.
I was gonna say, we could answer to that question too, since we have both going on. We still enter as a bulk, so we just do breakfast as a bulk entry. We have at some schools 300 kids eating at elementary. So in order to put them all in a point of sale, you can't get them through that fast. So
Right.
we do a clicker at our elementaries, and then we do a bulk entry into our point of sale software. And then for lunch, though, our software is set up, we do individually put them in, and that helps too with if we have students who just buy a milk or whatever. And then that ties into our production records. So we can see that, okay, we prepared this many breakfasts, we served this many breakfasts, and we had enough breakfast to serve. Same thing with lunch. So it just helps with accountability.
Well, thank you, because I wrote your name down, Julie, and I had questions. I would contact you. So, and then another question on the Family Economic Data Survey. Can we still process that in our software system?
That's such a great question. I'm glad you asked it. I failed to put information about that in here. It's not, you can process it in your system and associate the correct claim eligibility level or code with that student. But an important thing to remember is that because you're not when you say process, you mean some of it's manual, right? You're thinking of
They
the
enter the
form.
data into the system and then it generates a letter.
Okay.
It would
So
say,
someone's time is being used to do that. That time isn't an allowable cost to the food service account. So Tammy at OPS, I know has worked through this. And what's the method that you use, if you're willing to share? The method you use to understand how much the district needs to pay the food service account for the time that your staff, like Tammy's traditional school nutrition program staff, do still process those because they're the people who are familiar with using that information and comparing it to income guidelines. It made sense for them to keep that task, but they had to have a way or have to have a way to reimburse the food service account for the time those food service staff are spending doing that work.
What we did, Katie, is our point of sale software system tracks the number of forms that we process, whether they're online or paper. And then we did a study on the amount of time that it takes one person to process an app. Now, we don't pay for any of the printing of those forms. We don't distribute the forms. We do keep some extra ones here so that after the main group goes out, we found that it's easier if we keep up with it. If somebody needs 20 more or 25 more, rather than having them email an office and then they don't hear from anybody for a couple days because of their workload at the time. But we keep what we do for those forms very limited, so that way it's something that we can justify. Does that make sense? Okay.
It's a
Yes.
great answer for me.
Yeah.
Kate,
Yeah.
you go ahead.
yes, thank you.
Thank you for asking. That's such a good question. I really should have thought to include that in the slides. So it'll go in the written Q&A. So yeah. Any other questions or concerns or things you just want to hear from your colleagues about how they've handled something?
It's kind of related, but it's not. But how does everybody keep track of seconds? We use Cafe, and this will be the first year that we'll be charging for them. And usually we just make tallies, but I know we're a smaller school and it shouldn't be too bad of an issue to just write their names down. But I didn't know if we needed to get them in the habit, if they do get a second meal, to that they need to come by the point of service still.
Gina, you're at Bancroft Rosalie, right? I think that's right. So maybe similar-ish in size to Katie. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, we use our POS system for everything.
And Gina, they just go past you again if they got a second meal.
Yeah, if they have more than one milk, then the person doing the point of service charges them for that extra milk or the extra entree or whatever.
Okay, we'll just have to train them to get them to do that.
Yeah. It works pretty good.
Thank you.
And Susie and Niobrara said that someone at the end of the POS records them, or end of the line, I should say, at the point of service records maybe kids who get second items or extra items. And then you take it back after lunch or something and put the charges on the students' accounts. Yeah. Like you said, Katie, just train them, right? Sounds so easy.
Yeah, not.
Right. Good question, though. Thanks for your feedback, Gina and Susie. Andrew asked a good question in the chat here. I'm going to repeat it for you, Andrew, just in case some folks don't have that window open. LPS, Lincoln Public, began operating 8 buildings doing CEP 2 years ago, or was it last year? Either way, now they've added 15 new buildings for school year 24-25. And what has everyone seen for an increase in breakfast and lunch meal participation in their first year of CEP? Oh, Julie went back to COVID participation rates, which you're implying was an increase in Papillion, La Vista. Yep. So was that an increase of 10 to 20%? Or do you know, Julie? Compared to when you were charging kids, especially for breakfast, I think, is that the one where you experienced the most increase? I can't hear you, Julie, and maybe you're busy, but thank you for typing that. Have you seen an increase, Andrew?
We honestly, our COVID rates were low because our half enrollment at a lot of our schools, because that's what I wanted to look at, but it didn't really mean much. And then the first 8 schools we did after COVID, which we obviously saw a little bit increase, but just going from adding that many more, I'm kind of wondering if it's like, I know the research kind of says like 5 to 12 is kind of what they say, but it's actually what the application would be. I'm kind of interested in.
Yeah.
We'll be ready for it either way, but
Okay, yeah. Lewiston? Shanna, right? Aren't you at Lewiston? Last year was your first year too. Or, I gotta think who's been newer since COVID. Niobrara, you were new last year, I think, to CEP. And Franklin, Jan and Franklin, I think last year was your first year too. Did you notice any increase in participation compared to traditional free, reduced, and paid operation?
Our breakfast definitely increased. Our lunch, it stayed about the same. I think the first semester it probably increased, but then it went back to what it usually was. So
right on. Glad to hear breakfast was improved though, or more kids took advantage of that though.
Yeah, and I think lunch is they're pickier, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah,
As long as we're not seeing a decrease, I mean, I understand CEP is, it should be a good way to get those participation rates bumped up just a little bit, but glad to hear at least you're seeing an increase, a pretty reliable one in breakfast participation, because you know how important that meal can be for kids. So it's all
and then
about
we added a breakfast on a go, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
just like a bar and some fruit and a milk.
Yep.
And then once they found out about that, they liked that too. It was just an easy grab and go. But
for sure.
yeah.
I think you make a great point about using the provision, the CEP, that option alongside an alternate sort of meal service method that you think is going to make it easier for kids to get access to the food, through both of those things. So yeah, kudos to making those two things sort of work together.
Thanks.
And Tammy, of course, you do make a good point about it depending on the percent of free and reduced eligible students compared to the total enrollment. Yeah, prior to CEP adoption. Yeah, thanks for the info and details on yours, Julie. She said their breakfast participation went up 20 to 25% at her CEP schools. And though lunch increased, it wasn't as dramatic as the breakfast increase. And your title buildings already had good participation rates at lunch. So that's a good thing too. Thanks for sharing that. As we have reached an hour, thanks for hanging on for the latter half and asking and getting answers or sharing answers to the questions in the group. I'll follow up this with an email that includes the recording from today and the written questions and answers that we had both in the chat and from our discussion. And I will send that by the end of the day Friday. I'll include in that email too the alternate income form, which will be renamed to the alternate income form for CEP schools, as well as that template or sample household letter that I hope has useful language for you all to communicate with your households, especially those that are new adopters of CEP this year, to share information about what that means for the students in your school, along with the questions and answers and recording from today. So I appreciate your time so much. I appreciate your patience with the work we've been doing to qualify and approve lots of new CEP schools this year. And of course, I appreciate all you and your teams do to support students in Nebraska. So I know you're committed to this work and we appreciate getting to work with you. I hope you have a great rest of the week and always feel free to reach out with questions or concerns. And Andrew wanted me to put one more plug in about adult meal prices. Yes, I will send that email tomorrow morning. Yeah. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the day.